Okay, so the next thing we need to go over, or go ahead and delve right into this. The Terminus A Quo. There's two ends of this prophecy, so we call it two termini, the beginning and the end. So there's two termini. The first one, in Latinized version, is just the way scholars have decided to reference this. Terminus A Quo, that's the beginning. Terminus ad quem, that's the end. So what is the Terminus A Quo? What is the decree that gets this prophecy started? That came later after Daniel at some point. Well, some say it's the decree that happened in Daniel's lifetime. The decree given by Cyrus in 538 to 539 BC to let him go back to the land. That's the one I already referenced, that Cyrus let them go back. But I told you then that that was to go back and rebuild the temple, which they started a couple years later. At no time did they start rebuilding the walls. They just didn't have the resources and the means to do it. They just wanted to get back. And remember, this is a whole different, almost generation. A lot of these people were born into captivity, and they're going back, and they just got to get set up and get going. So there wasn't a rebuilding of the city at all at that time. There was just to going back and getting your house in order. Not much time to do else. Not much more time to do other things like rebuilding a city. Then there's the decree given by Artaxerxes to Ezra in 457 BC. This is another popular start point. I said there were 7. I'm going over 3 main ones. I'm just briefly mentioning them. One reason not to adopt this one, because also it's not involving rebuilding of the walls or the city. It's about enhancing the temple worship and appointing civil leaders among the exiles, etc. And Ezra was involved in that, but that did not involve rebuilding the city. So I don't think that decree is specific enough to be the one that matches Daniel's what Daniel's talking about in Daniel 9. So I think the best decree to go with is a third one that I'm going to stick on today. It's the same Artaxerxes. He's another Persian king, and this was a decree given by Artaxerxes to Nehemiah in 444 BC. And I think that's the one we need to focus on, and we're going to go with. It's also the one that Sir Robert Anderson chose, though he said it was 445 BC errantly, which I will show today. Harold Honer corrected the year to 444 BC appropriately. And then I think we still need to correct the endpoint, which is what I'll be involved in doing today, and that was what I did in the paper. So once we establish, as we talk through this, we will start this and prove that it involves the start point should be the decree given by Artaxerxes to Nehemiah. As we get that started, I want to reemphasize 1 week equals 7 years. That means the 69 weeks that we're talking about from the start point to the cutting off of the Messiah, which is what I'm focusing on today. That's 69 weeks. So if 1 week equals 7 years, 69 weeks equals 69 times 7, 483 years. So that's the time frame we're dealing with. So the word for week is Shabua, which just means period of 7. The Hebrew language is a limited language. They don't have a large vocabulary. Just the nature of the language. Nothing wrong with it. That's just the way it was. And so because of that, words can be used in different settings and have different meanings. You have to determine the meaning from the context. In English, we have words from all sorts of different languages that have been adopted. So we have all different ways to say things. But in this context, they could just as easily mean period of 7 as they could mean a literal week. Now, most of the time, they're talking about a 7-week deal, but not all the time. In Daniel himself, in the book of Daniel, he clarifies when he uses the word week elsewhere, but he doesn't clarify it in chapter 9. So I'll take you to 10:2 of Daniel, chapter 10, verse 2. It's best to interpret a book within its own book elsewhere to see how an author chooses to use words. So in Daniel 10:2, it says, I, Daniel, had been mourning for 3 entire weeks. And the literal translation of the Hebrew, 3 entire weeks, is 3 sevens of days. So he clarifies days, because that word entire, if you look it up, you can go to blueletterbible.com. You can look all this, words in the Hebrew and Greek up that way. It's very easy. And it will show you that that's the word day, yom. And so entire, that word entire, that means the word day is built in. It's telling you 3 sevens of days. Now, in Daniel 9, it doesn't say sevens of days, it just says sevens. And because of that, it leaves it open a little bit, as it should. And so, recall I told you that the people were in captivity for 70 years. Where did that 70 come from, you may ask? Did 70 was just an idea? It's a nice round number. It's a biblical number, of course, 7 times 10. But is there more to it than just that? So this idea of a 7-year week is not foreign to the Scripture. In Leviticus 25, 1 through 22, the people of Israel were instructed to let the land rest for one whole year, and that was called a Sabbath year. And so at the end of a period, a week of years, instead of week of days, at the end of a week of years, they're supposed to give a rest period of a whole year called a Sabbath year. So there you have a concept of a 7-year week already in the minds of Jews, built into the Torah. And in fact, the people for 430 years, according to Ezekiel 4, 1 through 8, and that includes Judah and Israel, it's almost like this 70-year captivity is in part due to Israel's failure, because God's kind of lumping it all together. It's for 430 years they ignored the land, the rest of the land, that year-long rest, that Sabbath year rest. They ignored it, and they were busy worshiping idols and ignoring the law. And because of that, that added up to about 70 Sabbath year rest that they ignored. And because of that, they got a 70-year captivity. That's stated in 2 Chronicles 36:21. The land now can finally enjoy its Sabbaths, it says, for 70 years of captivity to make up for the 70 Sabbath year rest that they ignored. So I think that helps set this in stone, because the 70 weeks of Daniel's prophecy are a response to the 70 years of captivity here. So we're dealing with weeks that are sevens, that aren't sevens of days, that are sevens of years. There's also this concept of years attached to an unspecified period of time already in the book of Daniel. So again, I'm asking you to look at Daniel to provide insight rather than going out too far. We'll stick within Daniel for a little while. So Daniel 4:32, it says that Nebuchadnezzar was driven mad for 7 times. Now, this is the word times. 7 times of what? What does times mean? Well, it says during that total period of time, his hair had grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws. That takes more than 7 days. So times is going to be a longer period of time than a day. Like weeks are a longer period of time than just days of a week, 7-day week. And it says that, which certainly, it says that it also makes reference to the dew of heaven. And so that seems like there's cycles of seasons going on. So most people interpret the 7 times to mean 7 years of madness, after which time he regained his senses. So in Daniel 7:25, when it says time, times, and half a time, if one time in Daniel 4 was a year, then time in Daniel 7:25 is 1 year. Times is a Aramaic dual, which is like the word both in English. It actually means 2, so it means 2 times. So times is 2 plus the first time, that's 1, so that's 3. 2 plus 1 is 3. And half a time, that's 3.5. I'm bringing this up for 2 reasons. One, to show you that the word time is undefined, yet it equals a year. The word week is undefined, so it equals 7 years, a 7-year week instead of a 7-day week. Common theme in the book of Daniel, to use unspecified periods of time like this to mean years. But I also want to make you think of Daniel, or the 70th week, that last 1 week in the prophecy that we're dealing with today, that it's divided in the middle. And so there's a 3.5-year break, time, times, and half a time. So keep that in mind in a second when we delve into this further and we further define the nature of a year. So we kind of know that 1 week must equal 7 years. But how long is a year? And you think that's simple. You think that's a no-brainer. But it's not, unfortunately. We have to think like Daniel. We can't think like a modern person. So we use, in our day and age, the Gregorian system, which is a calendar system that understands that there's not 365 days a year. There's not 365.25 days a year. There's 365.24219879, take the decimal point out. That's how many days there are in a year, and that keeps it exact. Otherwise, if you just take a 365.25 days a year, then it gets off over a period of years. You're off after over 400 years, you're off about 10 days before you know it, and that makes a big difference. So Pope Gregory, that's where the Gregorian name comes from, he, by that time it was recognized something has to be done, and he declared we need to change the system to this more accurate system. And that was in the 1500s, I believe. So that's not what Daniel was using. There's the 365.25 system, that's the Julian system, but that also was used at the time of Christ, but not at the time of Daniel. So what's Daniel using? He's probably using something more along the lines of a Jewish reckoning, which is a lunar-based calendar. Now, admittedly, they had a solar component to keep the feasts within the same season every year, so it didn't rotate. So Passover would always be in the spring. But primarily, it was a lunar-driven calendar. And so an argument can be made that we're dealing with a lunar cycle. And even beyond that we're dealing with 30-day months. And the reason I can say this is because Revelation helps us interpret Daniel, the book of Revelation. Now we're kind of branching out from Daniel, and we're using the New Testament to unlock the Old. We're using the book of Revelation, which is its purpose, is to unlock some of these Old Testament prophecies. Even Daniel 12:9 says, seal up this vision till the times of the end. Well, really the times of the end are beginning with the book of Revelation, which opens it up. So I think that's one of the purposes of Revelation. So if you look up Revelation 11, verse 2 through 3, 12, verse 6 and 14, and Revelation 13:5, you're going to see three phrases used interchangeably. 1,260 days, 1260, interchangeably with 42 months, interchangeably with time times and half a time. Now you see why I went through the trouble of maybe somewhat confusing you getting to that, but I want it to be in your mind here. The time times and half a time are part of this. And it's used interchangeably with 42 months and 1,260 days. So if you just take 1,260 days divided by 42 months, that means there's 30 days per month spaced out equally over a period of 3.5 years. And that's where time times and half a time comes in. So therefore, Revelation is interpreting time times and half a time also as 3.5 years. And it's using 30 days per month equally. Forget about cycling, the exact cycle of the moon. Forget about any kind of solar compensation. Admittedly, we're not talking about 365.25 or any other accurate rendering. We're dealing with a 360-day year. It's called a prophetic year. And Daniel knew it, and I know it, that this is not a real calendar. No one really ever used this calendar, but it is a prophetic calendar. And it's used for the purpose of calibration to any other calendar, no matter what period of time you live in. And so we're going to calibrate this calendar that Daniel's using, that Revelation tells you he's using, to the Julian system. And we're going to take it to the Julian system and not the Gregorian, because number one, Jesus, this ends at the time of Christ, at which time the Julian system was in play. Let's use that system because that's what they were using. And number two, astronomers use the Julian system and not the Gregorian, interestingly enough, when they're calculating the movement of celestial bodies. And they'll use the Julian day numbers that attach to a Julian day. That's a fact. So we have a built-in mechanism to go ahead and utilize when we're doing our calculations. We might as well do it that way. This makes it much easier to comprehend. But if time times and half a time is a reference back to the Daniel time times and half a time, and that is a reference to 3.5 years, and then the 70th week is cut in the middle, and it's a 7-year period, there's a 3.5 year right there too. So I think you're dealing with a 3.5 year time times and half a time in the 70th week. And that would therefore have to mean that 3.5 year period is 1,260 days, which means it has to be 30 days per month for every month in that 3.5 year period. So therefore the whole week, that last 1 week, has to be 30 days per month, 360-day year per year for that 7-year period. Well, if that's the way the 70th week goes, so should the other 69 to make the whole thing make sense, to make it consistent. That's why I think you have to have all 70 weeks using this system unlocked by Revelation. So I'll leave it at that on that subject matter.